Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy and specifically to talk about the ongoing drone warfare that Ukraine is launching against Russian energy infrastructure. Because over the last few years, we've seen Ukraine increasingly target oil refineries, fuel depots, export terminals, gas processing plants, pumping stations, storage facilities, and major logistics hubs all across Russia. And whilst the military battle continues on the front line, behind the scenes, a completely different type of war has been taking place, an economic war. Now, I've talked about this in previous videos, but the reason I wanted to talk about it today is because we now have a much clearer picture of the sheer scale of what's actually been happening. And honestly, when you go through the details, it's extraordinary because according to the latest reports, Ukraine has now carried out strikes against dozens of Russian energy facilities over the past month or so, covering almost every single stage of the oil and gas supply chain. This isn't just one or two isolated refinery attacks anymore. We're talking about facilities involved in crude oil processing, fuel storage, gasoline and diesel production, export shipping, railway distribution, gas processing, and pipeline infrastructure. Some of the sites targeted are capable of processing hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil every single day. Others are major export terminals that handle huge volumes of Russian crude heading to international markets, and many of these facilities are located hundreds or in some cases thousands of kilometers inside Russian territory. Now that matters because these are not symbolic targets, these are revenue generating assets. This is the infrastructure that converts crude oil into usable products, stores fuel before export, moves energy around the country, loads tankers heading overseas, and ultimately generates the cash flow that supports a huge part of the Russian economy and also the war in Ukraine. So from Ukraine's perspective, this is actually a really clever strategy because Ukraine can't realistically compete with Russia in a traditional war of attrition. Russia has more tanks, more missiles, more manpower, and significantly larger industrial resources. But what Ukraine has realised is that relatively cheap drones can cause disruption to infrastructure worth billions of dollars. And economically, that creates a very powerful imbalance. Because every time a refinery shuts down, Russia loses processing capacity. Every time a fuel depot burns, logistics become more difficult. Every time an export terminal is disrupted, revenue is delayed or lost. And every time critical infrastructure is damaged, Russia is forced to spend more money on repairs, air defense systems, security, and maintenance. Now, before we get into all of the details of this, can I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? Really does help me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. And if you don't want to miss any future updates, then please hit that notification bell. Now, one of the things that really stands out when you look through the latest data is the sheer variety of facilities that have been hit. Ukraine is not just focusing on one single target type. It's attacking multiple pressure points across Russia's entire energy system simultaneously. Production facilities, processing facilities, storage facilities, transport infrastructure, export infrastructure, and that's important because it creates cumulative disruption right across the supply chain. For example, Ukraine has recently struck major refining assets, including facilities at Perm, Tuapse, Volgograd, Ryazan, Saratov, and Ufa. Some of these refineries process over 100,000 barrels of oil per day. The Bashneft-Novoil refinery in Ufa reportedly processes more than 7 million tons of oil annually and sits over 1,400 kilometers, around 1,000 miles, from the Ukrainian border. That's an extraordinary range for a drone attack. The Afipsky refinery, another site reportedly been hit, processes around 144,000 barrels per day and plays an important role in export markets. Ukraine has also targeted Baltic export infrastructure, including Primorsk and Ust-Luga, which are critical because they handle massive volumes of Russian crude exports heading overseas. And as a result of those attacks, the operational disruption temporarily affects Russia's ability to load shipments through parts of its Baltic export system. Now think about the significance of that for a moment. This is not just about physical damage. This is about interrupting the flow of money into the Russian economy because oil and gas revenues remain absolutely central to Russia's financing. That is the cash flow that funds government spending, supports the ruble, pays for imports and helps finance the war itself. So if Ukraine can reduce refining capacity, slow exports, create uncertainty and force Russia to spend more money internally defending infrastructure, then economically it increases pressure over time. Russia's oil production has fallen by around 460,000 barrels per day currently compared with where it was a year ago. Oil product exports have also reportedly dropped to some of the lowest levels in recent years. And while sanctions clearly play a major role in that, repeated drone attacks are increasingly becoming part of the story. As we discussed in a recent video, Russia has now downgraded a number of its oil and gas production and export forecasts for the next few years. Again, partly due to the sanctions, but also because of the damage being caused by these drone attacks. Now, another really important aspect of this strategy is the economics of defence, because Russia is now being forced to defend energy infrastructure spread across an enormous geographical area. Oil refineries, ports, storage sites, pipelines, pumping stations, even rail terminals. These are often located hundreds or thousands of kilometres apart. That requires huge amounts of military resources, additional air defence systems, electronic warfare equipment, security personnel, radar systems, repair teams, and constant monitoring. So Ukraine is effectively forcing Russia to spend increasing amounts of money protecting its own domestic infrastructure. And again, economically, that matters. Now, psychologically, these attacks are also significant because many of these facilities are deep inside Russia itself. They're not near disputed territory, but deep inside the country. And that sends a very clear message that critical infrastructure is vulnerable wherever it is. Now, of course, Russia still continues to earn enormous revenues from oil and gas exports, and this strategy alone is not suddenly going to collapse the Russian economy overnight. But I don't think that's the objective. The objective is to cause long-term economic attrition, gradually increasing Russia's costs, reducing its efficiency, disrupting logistics, creating uncertainty, and slowly weakening Russia's economic position over time. And historically, wars are often determined as much by economics as military strength. If a country faces rising costs, falling revenues, infrastructure disruption, and growing financial pressure, eventually those problems feed into the wider economy. And when you combine these infrastructure attacks with sanctions, labour shortages, inflation pressures, high interest rates, and rising military spending, you can see why the pressure on the Russian economy continues to build from multiple directions simultaneously. So whilst most headlines continue to focus on troop movements and battlefield developments, behind the scenes an increasingly important economic war is taking place. And based on the scale and frequency of the attacks, Ukraine's drone campaign is clearly becoming one of the most important economic weapons it has. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they occur, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you have liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already.